It's day one of Texans training camp. Players are out there getting warmed up. Welcome into Texans Training Camp Live, presented by Xfinity. I'm DP Sidhu. Joining me, my good friend Drew Doherty. Day one of camp with my day one here in studio along with me. And we're going to show you lots of shots from camp. And we got a lot to unpack, Drew, for day one as players are getting warmed up. A lot of new faces out there, a few familiar faces as well. But first, camp for head coach David Culley and general manager Nick Caserio is now underway.
No doubt. And DB, you see some of those notable names right there. Number 16, Kiki QT, David Johnson, 31. Who's that number 2? Well, that's Mark Ingram. He was one of the more notable free agent signings of 2021. And of course, 13 is the Archer, Brandon Cooks. Really good job as a wide receiver last year with the Houston Texans, but much to cover, much to unpack as you see a little bit of a special teams drill going on, some punt coverage. We heard from general manager Nick Caserio before this all got going. He covered a number of topics. One of them was Randall Cobb, the wide receiver, probably not going to be out there today. He doesn't expect him to be out there today. There's been talk about a trade with Green Bay, so no Randall Cobb out there. Said about 79 players of the 90 on the roster, or close to the 90 on the roster because of some of these moves, are going to go through some bit of work, whether it's with the helmet on, with the helmet off, et cetera, et cetera. So there will be about 10 that aren't going to do anything on the field today. And of course, he was asked about quarterback Deshaun Watson, said it's a day-by-day situation. He didn't get into specifics about how much work he'll do, how much work anyone will do, but talked about number 4, and Deshaun Watson is on the practice field. He's got a hoodie on and a red jersey, and he is taking part in some of the work so far, DP. So it's an eventful day, no matter what's going on, but it's the start of training camp. Football is finally here after a long, long offseason and an even longer regular season that saw the Texans only win 4 games last year.
Yeah, you're right, Drew. And let's start with the wide receivers. You mentioned Randall Cobb. The Texans are still, quote, working through some details of that trade. Nick Caserio said there's a lot of rumors out there, a lot of speculation, but it does seem like the Texans are working towards a deal with Randall Cobb. In the meantime, they traded for Anthony Miller from the Bears, who is wearing number 3 out there. So some changes in the wide receiver group. And you mentioned Mark Ingram out there, number 2, and some new additions in the running back group as well. Phillip Lindsay joins the crew. David Johnson, who is expected to speak to the media after practice today, as well as Brandon Cooks, David Culley, maybe A.J. Moore, a few other players. So every day after practice, we'll hear from David Culley. We'll hear from some players in practice. But today was the day that we heard from Nick Caserio. And a lot of media out there asking him questions about Deshaun Watson and the status of the team, COVID protocols. Nick Caserio really just didn't say much about Deshaun Watson other than he had been in the building with the other players. So not a lot of speculation there. We'll see soon here how much work he does out there on the field. But when you look around, this facility looks pretty different than how it did a few years ago and even from last year, because the team is doing whatever it can to make this place a safe place for players as they undergo the COVID-19 protocols. They're out there practicing. They're getting tested. They were tested prior to the start of camp, and so that's why they're out there now. But, you know, they won't need to get tested every single day like they did last year. Those have eased up a little bit, especially if you've been vaccinated. If you've not been vaccinated, you will still need to be tested every day. So it's good to see players out there, good to see players healthy. The Texans made a number of transactions over the last 48 hours as well. They placed 4 players on the active non-football injury list, so you won't see Cornell Armstrong, Pharaoh Brown, Lonnie Johnson, or DeMarcus Walker out there. 3 players were placed on the COVID reserve list. Jaron Christian Sr., Buddy Howell, Taywan Taylor, and so we'll expect to see. And the guys on the NFI list, the active non-football injury list, they can be activated at any time. So it's not a big deal that those guys start off camp that way. They can come off at any time. But right now we're taking a look at some warm-ups, some individual drills out there at camp. And Drew, we're going to be joining them in a little bit as well as soon as we get done with this live show.
Yeah, and you see number 30 there on the right. Like we mentioned, that was Ingram there, number 2. But number 30 is Phillip Lindsay. And Phillip Lindsay's a running back who he had 1,000 yards as a rookie in 2018. He followed it up with another 1,000 in 19. And then he battled through a bunch of injuries last year, only played in 11 games with the Broncos, and had a season that was not up to what he had his first 2 years in the league. But in hearing from him and talking with him, he's excited about what he's got going on this offseason. And there's a lot of folks around the building who also share that optimism for 2021. And if you go outside the building, back to Denver, where he came from, he's a Colorado Buffalo, played for the Broncos his first 3 years. There's a guy who played for the Texans in 2008 and 2009, a safety, Nick Ferguson. He's now on the radio up there. He spent the bulk of his career with the Broncos. He's very excited and very encouraged and enthused about what Lindsey could bring to this offense. Said he's got a massive chip on his shoulder. Nobody's going to outwork this guy, which is saying quite a bit because NFL players are by nature really hard workers and animals in the weight room as far as trying to get better and whatnot. But it's going to be fun to see what Philip Lindsey might bring to this offense because I think it's an offense that will be better up front in blocking with this offensive line. So in union with that, you can see some nice things on the ground for the Texans. And one little last caveat. Ferguson said, look out for this guy catching passes out of the backfield. He didn't get that opportunity when he was with the Broncos. He said, give it to him here in Houston, and great things will happen.
It's a place where David Johnson really excelled late in the season last year. And you know what? We heard from Tim Kelly, offensive coordinator this offseason, David Culley and all the coaches, and it seems like there's going to be a big emphasis on running the ball. So we should see a lot more of the ground game, especially with this new revamped O-line. I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit. But seeing Philip Lindsey out there, 2 back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons to start off his NFL career, and then last year marred by injury. So he definitely hopes to get a fresh start, get back to his form like he did in his earlier years. And I'm excited to see him out there. We saw him out there in OTAs, and he was out there and he looked healthy, he looked good.
He sure did. And we see a little bit more work there, special teams-wise, on punt coverage. Texans have a new punter, Cameron Johnston. He's from Australia originally. He's been with the Eagles the last few years. You heard some of the new coaches talk about how excited they were to deal with Cam Johnston and have him in the fold. He's got a real strong leg. So it's one more change that the Texans need to get better at as far as the special teams go. It was an area that they want to get improved. And at punter, you've got a new name. You also have Andre Roberts, one of the punt returners, who he's coming off back-to-back Pro Bowl campaigns. This would be his 3rd in a row if he were to make it in 2021. And he's had a really, really it's his 4th in a row if he were to make it in 2021. So he's a guy that's really explosive, and he is good for about 10 yards a pop when he catches a punt.
He's a lot of fun to watch returning the ball. We talked about him a number of times out there in OTAs, how he receives the ball. He sort of plucks it out of the air as a punt returner and runs it back. But he's so steady back there in the backfield, and he still looks like he's got a lot of juice for considering how many years he's been in the NFL. I believe this is year 14 or along those lines. But Andre Roberts in the return game, it should be an exciting one to watch. I met with Cameron Johnston briefly. We had media days here in the building yesterday, and the special teams coaches and everybody's really excited to see what he does. He's got a powerful leg, strong leg, had the rugby background in Australia, played for Ohio State. Like you said, he played for the Eagles as well. So it'll be exciting to see what he does for the punt game out there.
No doubt. And we want to remind you, we'll take your questions, so please send them on in. We've got folks watching from all over the world, and we start with one from Adam. He says, are y'all going to be live every day for us? You're darn right. Only on days when they're not practicing, which the next one of those will be Sunday. But every other practice day, we are live. We will have this pregame show, and it will be fun. So, yes, make sure and join us. It's one of the best parts of our job. We get to interact with you and hopefully fill you in on anything that you don't know about. Right, DB?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, we're in studio now. We'll be out there on the practice field, and then we'll be getting interviews from players. So you'll start seeing those throughout the training camp live shows as well. And there's news every single day. Every day we're going to hear from David Culley, the head coach. We're going to hear from players, so we'll keep you up to date. I think it's a great way to start off every day of camp practice, sort of reset, let you know what you missed, because a lot can happen even once practice ends. I think Nick Caserio joked about an over-under on the number of transactions that could happen in camp, and a lot of those come down in the afternoon, so we'll be sure to break that down for you every single day.
Yeah.
Paul wants to know, which player are you most excited to see at training camp today? That's a great question, Paul.
Yeah, and that's one that a lot of folks, Darren also had to had this sort of a variation of that question, what new signing? I want to see what Lindsey looks like throughout camp. I don't know if it's going to be today as far as excitement, but just on the whole, I want to see what he can do there on offense. And then defensively, it's going to be really fun to see what anybody that's trying to get after the passer can do. So how about Shaq Lawson? Give me that guy. Let's see what he can do. Because the Texans have to get better pass rush-wise than they were last year. They just could not get to the quarterback, and that exposed a lot of different areas of the defense and put them under a lot of stress that they hadn't been under in years previously.
Yeah, I think there's so many players that I'm excited to watch, but I'm going to go with a position group, and I think I said this on Texans 360. I'm excited to see the O-line.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see the starting five and how they really line up together, because that's a group that we don't really know how it's going to shape up, but there's a lot of changes. Offensive line coach James Campen is new. Laramie Tunsil obviously returns, as does Titus Howard, but you've got that middle part of the offensive line is brand new. So I'm really excited to see what that looks like moving forward, because I think there's a lot of hope and optimism for how the offensive line is going to play, and also how the run game is going to go.
No doubt. And we see some of the the quarterbacks going through drills. You just saw Deshaun Watson throw a pass or two. So he's taking part in things. And he's also there with Davis Mills and Tyrod Taylor, as well as Jeff Driscoll. We also had a question about Nico Collins, the rookie receiver from Michigan. What number is he wearing? Well, he is number 84. So Nico Collins is wearing the number 84. Eric sent that question in. Appreciate you sending that in. We want to hear where you're sending these questions in from, whether it's Houston or Spring Branch or Conroe or Cyprus, Texas, Cyprus, the country, Istanbul, Ulaanbaatar, Outer Mongolia. It doesn't matter. We know Texans fans are everywhere around the world, and we want to hear from you. I know Christian in Germany is probably checking us out. We got some Scottish fans like Ewan St. Croix and many, many others. So we want to hear from you, and we want to know where you're sending these questions from.
All right. Well, David wants to know, which new signing are you most excited to see? That lends itself to a number of answers, Drew, because there were so many signings this offseason. But, I mean, I'm excited to see the rookies. I guess you could count a rookie as a signing. We mentioned Nico Collins. I think I'm excited to see the quarterbacks out there. We've talked about Deshaun Watson out there, but as well as Tyrod Taylor and the rookie Davis Mills. I'm excited to see what they're able to do out there with the weapons that are in place. So I'm excited to see really any of the rookies and the quarterbacks. I know that's a lot of, I can't narrow it down to just one, Drew, because it's only day one. So give me a couple of days, and then let me focus on some guys, and then I'll be able to tell you who exactly I'm excited to see out there.
Totally. I mean, when you have 90 players,
there's
a lot to
I want to look
choose
at
from,
everybody.
Especially when this roster, it's getting very, very close to have reached 90 transactions, since the season ended. I mean, that's mind-boggling. You haven't had this many transactions since year one, 2002. And that's kind of an anomaly because you've got to get a team together. Just by nature, you're going to have 90 new guys. You're going to each one of those is a transaction. So every other year, it's a far smaller number. And Nick Caserio has been very, very active and gotten after it as far as churning things over and getting new guys into the fold and out on the field.
We're talking about new guys as far as players, but there's a lot of new guys as far as coaches. And Paul wants to know, what are your expectations for David Culley this training camp? Obviously, his first training camp as head coach of the Houston Texans. My expectations are a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, a lot of juice. We're going to get players mic'd up every day, and we saw David Culley mic'd up this offseason. Hopefully we get him again as well. I know, Drew, you're going to get a chance to chat with them before practice every day when fans start coming into this NRG Stadium Park. But I'm excited to see the energy he brings, because we've heard so much about his sense of humor and how he really interacts with guys. So my expectation is that he gets guys amped up. It's really something that's very hard to do in training camp, especially as you get to week 3 and beyond. Days start to drag. It becomes Groundhog Day. It's hot. Guys are tired. But I expect him to bring a lot of energy and keep everybody really invigorated throughout camp.
Yeah, that's going to be very important, because this is a team that the outside world does not think much of, and does not have high expectations for. So he's got to keep those, like you said, those guys invigorated, inspired, and ready to play for 2021, because they kind of have to have that bunker mentality. I don't want to mix and mingle analogies, and I don't want to compare this to warfare. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that they don't have a lot of hope outside of the building, but within the walls, they're very optimistic about what they can do, and he's got to make sure that continues, that optimism, that plays on into September and October and beyond. Because the Texans, you and I have talked about this. You brought up the offensive line. I think that alone, getting better there, is going to pay so many dividends across the board for this team. If you can run the ball better, if you can protect the quarterback better and really control the game better on offense, you're going to take your defense off the field to keep them fresher, give them better chances to tee off on the opposing quarterback. It could really cascade and make things a lot easier on the rest of your ball club, as we see there in the middle of things, Tyrod Taylor, as well as Romeo Crennel. There in the center. He's got his hands on his hips. It's nice to see Romeo out there. He's now a senior advisor on the team. So he's not coaching, but he is a very, very important component of what's going on here with the Texans, and that guy has forgotten more football than most of us will ever know. So I'm happy that Romeo's still around. He just got inducted into the Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame. It's a very worthy and fitting honor. He played for Western Kentucky back in the day. He also was a coach there for a little bit, began his coaching career, so congrats to Romeo belatedly on making the Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame.
Always a pleasure to see Rack around the building.
Yeah.
I saw him a few months ago just walking around, and he's always got a smile on his face. I'm sure that's different when he's on the field with the players, but in the building, he's just such a pleasure. Jonathan wants to know, how many new players do you think the Texans will sign before the season? Nick Caserio alluded to the fact that there might be a number of players that they may still be signing. There might be a number of transactions. If I'm not a guessing girl, but if I was, I'm going to throw a number out there. I'm going to say 15.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably low. I think you go over on that.
That's a good number. I was going to say a dozen. That's not but I don't think that's a wacky or liberal number that you're throwing out. I think that's a pretty good number. This is, if you go by what you've seen through the first 3, 4, 5 months of the offseason, that seems right about on cue. They're going to mix and match. They're going to kind of see what's going on as far as who's out there on the fringes of other rosters, and I think they're going to pick those guys up as we see more work done by the Texans offensive line there in the distance, and closer in you got the Texans defense doing some stuff too. But yeah, I think you can see quite a few transactions go down trade-wise as well before the season starts. And just off to the right of the screen, number 94 with the Red Sox red taped-up shoes, it's defensive end Charles Omenihu. Charles is somebody, DP, that we really need to discuss because he has high expectations. No expectations are higher than his. But the defense has pretty high expectations of him as well, and he's a guy that is going to need to play pretty well and improve and keep getting better. Had very, very promising rookie year, took some steps last year as well, but he is up and excited about what might come here in 2021. I was on a podcast with him. It's the Man Cave podcast with my good buddy Sean Clinch out of Austin earlier in the offseason. He was on it with me, and he trained in Austin this offseason. Very, very excited about what is to come, and I can't wait to see what he can do because it's somebody that they have a lot of hope for, and we're surprised that he lasted a couple years ago so far into the draft.
Yeah, heading into year 3, but year 1 under Lovie Smith's defense. It's a 4-3 defense, so I'm excited to see that entire defensive front and how they really make that adjustment. And Charles Omenihu just seems to get better and better every offseason. Last year was just a rough year for everyone, tough goings for everyone, but I think the arrow is pointing up for Charles Omenihu and some of those veterans in that defensive line room. Brandon Dunn, I may get a chance to catch up with him later today. They've got Malik Collins, they've got Shaq Lawson. Whitney Merciless moves into that D-line group. So I think that's going to be a really fun group to watch here this training camp.
And don't forget Jacob Martin. He's a guy that had a lot of high expectations coming out of last August. I mean, there were folks, namely the former defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver, who was really, really excited about what he was going to do. And another guy who is very, very important to this defense, number 21 there, right in the center of your screen, cornerback Bradley Roby. Got suspended, missed a good chunk of the season, so he's got a lot to prove. And he's somebody that the Texans are going to need to rely on and will rely on to help in that secondary. He was kind of your number one guy there at corner the last 2 seasons when he was on the field. He's got to play like that again. He's gotten some help. There have been some additions in the secondary, so you think the pass defense will be a little bit better in that regard with some of those changes there. But Bradley Roby is somebody that could use a big year. And if he does have a big year, I think good things are going to follow in suit for the Texans defense.
He is such a difference maker when he's out there on the field. I remember last year he got banged up in that Green Bay game early, and the Texans really struggled to contain Davante Adams. So when Bradley Roby's out on the field, he's so effective. It'd be nice to get another number 1 corner or someone to match up against him. I know we've made so many changes in the backfield. So they've added a number of guys, and Nick Caserio said that he can sign these guys to the roster, but really it's going to be up to them to sort of bubble up through the competition and to claim their roster spots. They have no preconceived notions of who's starting where. And David Culley even said that he's okay with a rookie starting his first year. If he goes out there and he can beat the competition, he does well in training camp. So really it's anybody's game out there. Anybody can make the roster. And, I'm excited to see. Someone asked, what is your favorite part of training camp? Brooke wants to know that. And Brooke, I'm going to say my favorite part of training camp is to see how this 53-man roster develops, because right now, that is anybody's guess right now, who's the starting 53. And I think towards the end of camp, we'll have a better idea, maybe not a perfect idea, but a better idea who the starting 53 is going to be. So that's going to be my favorite part of camp because we're going to see it unfold live in front of us. It's not predetermined. We've got Tyrod Taylor out there, for instance, warming up with some of the first teamers, and it'll be exciting to see what happens as training camp wraps up here in a few weeks.
Dang it, DP, you took my number one, which is seeing how the roster shapes up. So number two, I guess I'll go when I walk into the air conditioning after practice is finished. That's a nice feeling too. Although it's going to give us like little sniffles and stuff here in about a week. At least me. As far as immune system. But no, I like seeing guys emerge that you hadn't thought were going to emerge the way they did. There's always a camp star if you go back through the years. I mean, guys like Lestar Jean, who he hung around the fringes of this team for a few years, but he had big camps. And then you've got guys like Trendon Holiday, who was a monster on special teams, returned 3 kickoffs or punts, some sort of kick or punt for touchdowns back in 2012. And then he didn't really do it during the regular season. It's always fun to see that stuff emerge and happen in the preseason and training camp because sometimes it has a big bearing on what happens. Sometimes it has no bearing whatsoever. So I just like that kind of screwball that gets thrown out there a time or two each year at Texans training camp.
Well, that's right. And you know what, Drew? The fun's going to continue because we're going to be live every single day from training camp at the start of camp. But for today, we're going to wrap it up. You and I are going to head out to practice, get some interviews, and be sure to check out HoustonTexans.com for all the coverage and all the stories and all the interviews that we get here and press conferences live coming after practice from David Culley and some of the players. But we're going to wrap up Texans Training Camp Live presented by Xfinity. Special thanks to Drew and everyone that worked on this show, Tyler Marcotte, Mitchell Moreland, Caroline Jordan. As I'm looking at Caroline Jordan, thank you so much for everyone that's out there watching. And be sure to tune in tomorrow for another edition of Texans Training Camp Live. That's going to do it for today. As always, thanks for watching, and go Texans.